City of Charleston Councilwoman Carol Jackson is busy with a lot of projects as she leaves office on January 11th after serving one term as Charleston City Councilwoman. I speak exclusively with Councilwoman Jackson for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Councilwoman Carol Jackson, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy holidays to you. I know that you wanted to come back on Quintin's Close-Ups because you want to focus on the African-American settlement communities on James Island that apparently have plenty of disparities issues. Apparently, they have no sewer hookups available, dirt roads, no safe bike and pedestrian road routes, neither any convenient bus stops. Let me start with the sewer first, Carol. How much sewer is the town of James Island and the James Island Public Service District giving to African Americans with President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act?
Well, I think that's still to be determined, Quintin, and basically that's why I'm dedicated, even as I leave office on January 11th. I have been privileged to make a lot of good friends and, meet people that have been longstanding property owners for generations, if not over 100 years now, especially in what I call the south end of James Island. So basically, if you go, toward Folly Beach, after you've crossed through the intersection of Grimble Road, Grimble Extension that comes around from Secessionville,
right.
They're all a bunch of former, agriculture farm roads that people traveled on, on dirt. I'm sure maybe some of the better ones were gravel. So the good news is for that part of James Island, which most people that don't, travel through there, think of James Island as totally developed, and there's really nothing more to, go on as far as new development or upgrades to the existing subdivisions and things like that. And for the most part, that is, correct. A lot of the original bedroom communities that were off the peninsula were subdivided back in the 50s and the 60s and then on into the early 2000s, as Mayor Riley was, pretty zealous, I would say is a good word, about growing the city boundaries and doing a lot of annexation on James Island, which until the 50s had been almost 100% agricultural based. It was the breadbasket of cash crops that, were grown up until that era of beet crops and whatever else they were selling commercially. Anyway, so it's a lot of old agricultural territory that the heirs of a lot of the sharecroppers and original settlers after the Civil War have now subdivided for their own purposes among family members, or as they've decided to, potentially sell it off. But there's never been the equal development of what I would just call generally infrastructure that you would expect to happen as properties are subdivided and made smaller so that more houses can be built, or however people, want to use their land. Nobody's farming anymore, as far as I can know. Maybe, big gardens, but there's no actual agriculture as any sort of livelihood. So most of it is benignly owned land that people have lived on for a long time. What I learned over the last year primarily was that as the final larger subdivision that populates that part of James Island, in what I call the circle of the road system that goes from Secessionville over to Grimble Extended, down Folly Road, and then you can make a loop by turning east on Battery Island Drive and then going up to Old Military and come out the other side. So it literally is a whole circle of travel roads. And within that circle is a subdivision that I've been doing the plat research on just for my own information, that was primarily subdivided at the end of the 90s into 2000, 2002. And the name of that subdivision is Ocean Neighbors. and they were annexed into the city at that time and provided sewer and water from Charleston water system. And that's based on the fact that as the James Island as a territory was being challenged, but in the county wanting to create its own local town of James Island, and the public service district that served the county, there was an agreement signed that I haven't seen the copy of yet, but I'm dedicated to getting that literal agreement. So there was an agreement made between the Charleston water system and the public service district that provides sewer and sewer to the property owners, that any property that remained in the county would be serviced and connected through the public service district. Any property that was annexed into the city would be provided sewer by the Charleston water system, as well as water. So the owners that are, a lot of the property owners now are in the city. They ring the Ocean Neighbors subdivision pretty much on the lower end of Folly Road, and then around on Battery Island and Old Military. So if you think of it, that's like a half moon of that full circle. And a lot of those property owners, the vast majority of them, are in the city as annexed, and each of those properties would have made a voluntary decision to be annexed. And I believe, but I haven't been able to document it yet, that they were given the understanding that if they annexed in, then they would be provided sewer and water through the Charleston water system. But that isn't the case. So I have now at least 30, if not more. We haven't finished making our comprehensive list of talking to property owners yet, but at least 30 people have declared that they only have septic systems and they want to be connected to sewer. So that's basically the background. And then we have a similar but different situation on the other side of Folly Road, pretty much parallel. The road that leads into this another portion of the African American community is James Perlow Road, and that land was Perlow land, and those properties are mostly still in the county. So they have sewer hookups through the PSD, but they don't have water. So they're on well water because PSD doesn't provide water. So it's like, we're looking at properties that are literally not in the 21st century. And that's really my goal, is to help any property owner that wants to have that opportunity. And I do think, what better time than now, when we've got environmental justice is the theme of all the work that the Environmental Protection Agency is shepherding, at the federal and state level. And then, which basically means giving people a safe, a safe environment for their daily lives. And sewer and water are pretty key to having a safe environment, especially in a elevation zone like we have in that part of James Island in particular, that, sea level is not our friend. The tidal creeks are rising every time we have a king tide. You can see the extent of that in the tidal creeks. And then as the rain, we haven't had that much rain over the last months, but when it rain bombs, that also adds to the water levels. So when you have dangerous low-lying water levels and you have septic fields or you have wells, they become contaminated a lot, the chances of being contaminated are greater. So it just seems like that's a true mission for improving the environmental quality of the landowners in that part of James Island, as well as the money that's going to be dedicated now through the CARES Act delivery of funds, and then the infrastructure bill, which is passed, but we don't know how it's going to be delivered yet. So we have two bites of a huge apple, in my opinion, for making a case that yes, on paper, CWS can't provide water to the people that are, part of the James Island Service or Public Service District area to serve, but they don't have the, capacity and the technology. So I'm trying to figure all of that out. I want to give appropriate, thanks to the leaders of the public utilities, the Public Service District, their commissioners, and the staff, as well as the Charleston water system. Up until now, no one's challenged their authority and the way that their division of sewer hookup authority has been established. But that's leaving good people out of the equation, in my opinion. And so the Charleston water system was asked, well, would they service water for some of these people, say on Battery Island or Old Military? And the answer is yes, but they won't pay to connect them. So that could be like anywhere between a $30,000 and $50,000 cost of literally installing the type of sewer connections that then Charleston water system could service, or the PSD could service if they decided to make that legal agreement. That's fine, but somehow we've got to get the money for the property owners, and I think that's where the government, funds come in, and we have to prioritize them. So that's my goal. I'll be a private citizen after January 11th, and I'm pledged to help the neighbors. It's very encouraging to me as a lifelong community involvement member. Some people would call me an activist. I'm not sure I'm really an activist, but I definitely have always been somebody who champions local government and is the best when its citizens are involved. And it's very encouraging to me that there are people now in the properties that need to be better served that are willing to, sort of organize themselves and make lists and talk to each other, and hopefully we'll be able to have meetings, or they'll be free to come to the public sessions. The two utilities have meetings. Public Service District meets monthly. The Charleston water system doesn't usually have a membership meeting because it's not the same type of authorization by the state. It's not an elected office. They elect one commissioner, but their board does allow citizens to come, and so I'm hoping that we can do a lot without having to make a lot of noise that can be satisfied in working together. So that's my goal.
Yeah, how many septic fields and wells are there on the south end of James Island?
Well, like I said, right now I definitely have a list of 30 property owners who only have septic, and I think there's like 6 or 8 well owners that only have well water. They don't have the ability to be connected into the water system, but that number could grow. There's a lot of people that maybe own the property, but they don't live there. So we've got to be, we can't just knock on doors and find the people that would be the actual property owner to sign a hookup request document. But for sure, we have 30 sewer, not only septic sewer owners, and I think it's 6 or 8 only well owners that would like to be connected into public utilities.
Now, how many properties on the south end of James Island are actually in the county?
I'm still figuring that out too. You'd think it would be like, you could get on a website and just click a report and you'd find that. But literally, I have to go property by property to see if it's annexed or not. So yeah.
Wow. Now, that elevation zone, what will that be in the next 5 to 10 years in your mind?
Risky. That's also the good news, that why I think this is the opportune time, to be making decisions that are good stewardship of our land, and because the city has done, and now the county has done their own comprehensive plan too. So we have the two primary jurisdictions. The town doesn't incorporate properties this far south on James Island. Their town limits stop closer to Fort Johnson Road. They do have a few neighborhoods that are a little on the other side. But anyway, the two jurisdictions that regulate anything or service this part of James Island are the city or the county.
Yes, ma'am.
And we've both done our comprehensive plans looking into the future, and for the first time, both jurisdictions made a big study of literally the topography and the hydrology and the watersheds of our territory, our combined territory. And you have to talk about it like that. It's a combination because, as everybody says, water knows no boundaries. So it's like we're all dealing with each other's watersheds. And I consider that good news. I understand, back in the day, if you were in two different jurisdictions and you had the same problem to solve, it was like you could be the victim of pointing fingers, for decades. But that's no longer true. People still like to talk about, oh, we didn't want to go into the city and blah-de-blah-de, but I don't pay attention to that anymore because it's now the 21st century and we've all been, on James Island and the jurisdictions that we've had for the last at least 10 years, if not more. And we have problems to solve together. And I do think that the leadership that I was privileged to be part of the last 4 years, knows that irrefutably and will never go away from that agreement that we have to work on things, collaboratively, cooperatively, pool our resources and our citizens. So anyway, we've both done our plans. We all know that we have elevation conditions that should be framing the way that we add any additional density to places that are low, sea level, have base elevations where you would have to either build up the dirt or build up above the dirt in order to meet the federal government flood zone requirements. And we know that if there's, if we're building density, then we shouldn't be adding infrastructure that's going to still have to be on the ground and running water, into overburdened, flooded areas, wetlands, tidal creeks, things like that. So I do think that, as the years go on, we're going to be much more protective about any additional density that we allow to be built or infilled, into that whole lower end of James Island. And that's not the only place, but it's one that is sort of ripe for investigation by developers who like to build the small subdivisions. We're not talking about Pulte Homes coming here and building, 200 houses any longer. There's just not enough land for that. But there is a lot of older, areas that are the original farm grounds and that have either never been built on or have so few, structures that it would be easy to fill in and add, let's say a dozen to 20 new homes or mixed use properties or whatever a developer would like to price out and think could work. And that's where we're going to be, we're going to be making smarter decisions based on the information that we all know now about the impact of watershed, understanding the nature of your watershed area before you allow building that could be risky.
Now, what are those overburdened flooded areas in your district?
Pretty much the whole of James Island, and this was a good cooperative thing. We paid the bill with the county and the city and the town to hire Thomas and Hutton as a very established civil engineering, water engineering company. So they did what we called the Basin Inventory of James Island 2 or 3 years ago, and they basically mapped out 30 different watershed basins, and then within each of those, and then developed a list of information basically about each of the basins. So how many are connected by storm drain systems, who maintains them. So we have a whole data set for each of the basins that then could lead to an evaluation And it's all, pretty at the macro level. When we're looking at places to improve, like the runoff conditions for a particular neighborhood, we have to get into an even finer drill down of the field work and things like that. But it's a great baseline. So we have these 30 basins that were evaluated based on the criteria that we all agreed were important to capture, and then they are ranked based on which basins really have the most urgent needs to improve. And James Island Creek Basin is one of the largest, and it's also, by all the criteria, the one that deserves the most improvement in terms of controlling water that's running into the creek. And I'm sure that the other venture that I felt I was instrumental in framing up was to create this task force that is paying attention and making improvements in response to the state's requirement, the mandate that we have to improve the toxicity numbers for the James Island Creek. So those things, are logical. It makes sense that James Island Creek, as a place to need to add better storm drainage or better connectivity of the storm drains, is also the place where we know that we've got a lot of bad water running into the creek. And it turns out that most of that is most logically old septic systems. So we've identified, I'd say, about 250 septic fields that are in a whole different part of the island up around. A lot of them are in the town. Clark's Point is the name of that neighborhood off Dill's Bluff. Yes. And those, the majority of those homeowners still have septic. So that's another place where we're gonna, work hard to bring in federal money that will come through the state and be able to offer, the conversion of septics to sewer. Now, interestingly, that neighborhood doesn't have many persons of color. It's not a traditionally African American neighborhood by any stretch. So it was a new subdivision in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the neighbors that moved in there wanted to keep their septic. And when you have a working septic system, it's great for the property owner. The only thing you have to do is make sure that it works. So you have to clear it out, pump it out, whatever you have to do every now and then, every few years when it's working well. So the people that moved into that subdivision, they didn't want to pay to be hooked up to the water system, because then they would have to pay monthly fees and things like that. So that was all part of the creation of the town. I think it actually was the home of the mayor. It's named Clark's Point for her family. So it's all very interesting. I love the local history of people, growing and changing together. So that neighborhood, we're not ready to even, go door to door or talk to anybody. We just have a map where we know that they're not on sewer. And but there's already rumors out there about that. We've had a couple of different sessions with the Intergovernmental Council where the PSD has presented their early findings and things like that. So it's known, by the people of the island who are paying attention, that there's a big chance that we're going to be requiring we hook up sewer at some point in time in order to solve the toxicity problems of the creek, because that's where they've pinpointed one of the biggest sources. It's human fecal matter that ends up in the creek.
Now, and and what are those toxicity numbers right now?
I don't know. They're off the charts compared to what they should be. Okay. I mean, we're never, the mandate that we have from the state will never make it, perfect, but safer. So there's ways of, I guess, evaluating toxicity that give you a range of safety. So you would never want to swim it and put your head under the water. But, to actually like get into a boat, and put your feet in the water or do stand-up paddling or things like that. So that's what we're going for, is that kind of, water quality that would allow people to at least use the creek and the tidal. It's a huge set of tidal creeks that spin off from James Allen Creek, which used to cut the island all the way through, went from the Ashley to the Stono rivers, and then they basically dammed it up when they built, in the 30s, when they built Riverland Drive all the way down. So there's not an easy way. I've heard people have tried to kayak through the big culvert that that divides Riverland Drive from the Stono River. But anyway, it's a huge, long creek, and it has a lot of little spurs off of it where people can do kayaking and stand-up paddling and, fishing and things like that.
Absolutely. And speaking of the public, service district, you talked earlier about obviously the capacity technology. What's their capacity, and what technology should they be using now?
Well, I mean, they should. There's two major ways to connect, and I ran for office thinking I was going to work on affordable housing, so I'm learning all of this on the fly. But I've really tried to be a good student of the science and the engineering. So basically, there's two ways of providing connected sewer service into the plumbing in your home, and the best way, the most permanent way, the generally supported way is to have what they call a gravity system, which basically, your water and sewage leaves your house, it runs through pipes out into the street, and then those pipes carry it to a pump station, and then the pump station delivers it to whatever huge main pipes are going to carry it to the treatment plant. So that's the way that Charleston Water Systems sewer service works. The PSD has some pump stations and gravity systems. They try. That's their favored way of installing new installations too. But in places that don't have close enough proximity to a pump station, then there's another technology that basically puts little mini pumps at every home, and the water runs out of your house into your own pipes that then have their own pump that literally moves what's supposed to go through the pipes to the bigger pipe system. So that is in places that are sort of out of the way and not part of a bigger gravity system. That's the easiest way to get sewer connected, but it's also very expensive in terms of the installation itself. And then homeowners will have the electric bill that comes along with pumping. At their meter, their own electric meter will be paying the bills. And some communities give discounts to people who establish their own pump systems because it's a value. So I think that's something that we can look at as a community too. Personally,
and
I'm going to be doing all of this on my own now, Quintin, with friends and neighbors. So. You'll be talking to Councilwoman-elect Parker very soon.
As a matter of fact, let me go to that because City Council, obviously, as you know, voted 8-4 on December 21st to give initial approval to form a commission on equity, inclusion, and racial conciliation. If given final approval at the January 11th council meeting, the new commission would carry on the work done by a panel of the same name formed on a temporary basis in June of 2020. The new councilwoman said this, quote, "A disappointing move by the mayor and council last night by reintroducing that is the Special Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation back on the agenda in front of the same members who voted no for it in August, in less than 30 days before 3 new members are sworn in." Let me ask you, what changed from August to right now?
I think it was a matter of people working it through. I'm sure if you weren't at the August meeting when we took the first vote, and then the subsequent one in September, I think Councilmember Appel put it the most succinctly when he said, what we heard in opposition to establishing a permanent commission, and this one's going to be called the Commission on Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation. Right. Take away the words equity and inclusion. And what Councilmember Appel said clearly, in my opinion, at both those sessions, as well as when the commission voted to put the full set of recommendations forward to the mayor. Councilmember Appel, I think, correctly, stated that there are few words that, and it's not original to Charleston, but Charleston, has a history of attaching ourselves to words that then become divisive and weaponized, as that was the word that Councilmember Appel used. And I think that was very, very unfortunate and disturbing to people, even the council members that ended up voting no in the summer. No one really wanted it to be that, that divided, that weaponized. And so I think what happened in the interim is, good people got together and talked through what it was that, they would never support, as opposed to the things that they would end up, agreeing are the right sets of goals and action steps that the city should be taking on. That was the work that was supposed to happen, is supposed to happen. The report itself was never like a Bible document coming down, from Mount Sinai as the 10 Commandments. We were never supposed to just say, okay, we've got 125 recommendations, and we're gonna do every single one of them in lockstep with the actual language that was in that recommendation. That was never the intention. The commission members who worked on that set of recommendations understood that from the beginning. They were putting their best work forward for the city to evaluate, deliberate, accept, reject, modify, work on, for an indefinite period of time. This is not like we're going to do it tomorrow. This is sort of a paradigm shift of, understanding of responsibilities and values and agreements that citizens will be having a lot of input with, too, however you want to say that. But unfortunately, it became just this take it or leave it, my way or the highway, type of argument that never turns out well. And I think the council themselves, who took that vote that denied the commission at its second reading, realized that this is worthy of a new opportunity. And I do think that's where that 8-person majority came from. So I understand Councilwoman-elect's critique of this, that, it's the old council, but the old council poured ourselves out during that whole year of, of encouraging the commission to do their work. A lot of us were observers of their subcommittees, and so I think actually it's pretty brilliant that the old council took the first vote, and a new set of council members who were elected. And I think it's only there's right now there's only 2 who are new. Right. There's going to be a replacement for Councilwoman Del Chapo's seat that's literally elected on January 11th, or most likely there'll be a runoff. I think that's what people are expecting. Right. So anyway, I think it's sort of really the right timing that the old council got to weigh in, and then new council members will come in, and what they will think. I hope they take their season of really trying to understand this before they take a vote.
Now, okay, what was the actual language in August, and what's that language now?
It really didn't change much,
Okay.
except the name of the commission, and I think there were a couple of like reporting requirements and things like that that sounded too aggressive. But yeah, in terms of basically, I didn't start it, but I think played my part as a council liaison representative to the Commission on Women that had basically disappeared. Mayor Riley established a women's commission, I don't know, back in the early 90s maybe, or at some point in time, and then it basically had just not been, repopulated as people left. And so under Mayor Tecklenburg, he determined that, the city needs a commission on women's issues that make that their main focus on behalf of the city. And so that's exactly what this, Human Affairs Commission and Racial Conciliation Commission will do. They're not going to be some new dictator. They're not going to usurp any authority that, elected officials have. Basically, they're going to establish their own focus to make sure that the city is always taking advantage of, any opportunity that the city has to show leadership or to move the ball up the field for making our city as equitable and fair and, good to the human beings that populate our municipality. And so I really do hope that once it's established, people can just sort of relax and know that this is not, some takeover by, liberals, left-leaning people. I mean, however, the whole atmosphere has been, discussed in the media and social media, which I don't look at because it's even, more divisive. I do think that it's going to, this commission will serve its purpose, but it's not going to be any big deal. It's going to have a good, set of people and oversight and an extended work plan that will just continue.
Now, I'm gonna get back to that work plan in a second, but she says this on her Facebook page. She says this, and just tell me if it's wrong or true. She says this: the commission will reallocate police funds, eliminate cash bail and bond system. She also says there's $100 million for reparations. She also says that there's racial equity training for all city employees, including critical race theory, that is, and there's a couple other things. Is that true?
Again, I think she's restating some of the detailed recommendations that are part of the report. Defund the police was never talked about. There's that part of the criminal justice subcommittee's work was to talk about how the police needs to have enhanced abilities that doesn't belong with policing, or police the hardcore of the police on the front line of 911 calls, or the patrollers, the teams. They're not trained into how to intervene in domestic violence situations, for example, and follow up and make sure that the repetitiveness of 911 calls, because if there's ongoing domestic violence in a family, they don't have the social work skills to continue to follow up to make sure that, or to help the fact that maybe we could prevent those domestic violence incidences if the family members were given, more support. So it's that kind of interweaving what are traditionally mental health and social work and childhood intervention and things like that, all into one set of supports that the police will be able to take advantage of. And there's nobody in the city leadership that I've ever spoken with, including me, who I know I'm, touted as one of the most liberal council members. None of us have ever talked about, minimizing the budget for the police. We were banged away at by the ACLU and the People's Budget, People's Coalition, because we were in total agreement that the police budget needs to be as healthy and robust as it has to be in order to keep neighborhoods safe and keep our policemen well trained. I'm very proud that, Chief Reynolds understands the value of training, and he is letting no stone stay unturned about making sure that our police force is as well trained in the ways of society needs as any police force in the state. So yeah, there's no mention of defunding the police as one example. There's no mention. I mean, yes, they use the term critical race theory as a standard for how the city should be encouraging the school system to reevaluate its curriculum on racial history. But and that is one of those weaponized terms. It's very unfortunate, and it really, when you boil it right down, it means nothing, because critical race theory is like at its actual academic is part of a law school education where lawyers are trained about how to manage something like that in court. What I think that my understanding of when that term is used on the local level for public education, especially for children, it's like, teach history, teach what really happened, the complete history of our state, of our region, of our city. That is what the educators in the subcommittee really do mean, and we talked that through over at the meeting where we passed the recommendations on to the mayor and city council, and to a person, I think the education subcommittee members said, this is something that we want to put forward as an example of how important it is for our community to get serious about teaching the truth about our whole history. So that's where that is. But there's not going to be any opportunity for the city to even dictate curriculum. Hopefully the city will continue to be a good partner to the school system to provide our facilities and our recreation programs that dovetail with what the school system is teaching children, and we're going to be able to continue to be partners in that opportunity. But basically, the city has facilities. We don't have education programs.
Right. Okay. Why is it the city's responsibility to take on this task?
Take on the task of the commission?
Well, education, as far as that.
Oh. I mean, I think that because we're supporters to our whole society, so I wouldn't say that we're not responsible for what children are learning. I think we're in a lane where we want our children to be educated in all aspects of their opportunities. So I'm a big supporter of the Children's Museum. I'm sorry that they have to be called museum. That's in their charter or something. But actually, they're a childhood education, adjunct to the city and the school system, and they are teaching. All of their programs are geared to STEM or STEAM education opportunities for under-resourced kids, underprivileged kids. And so I think it's that kind of thing. The more we can dovetail with what our children in our city, will benefit the most, then that's what we should be doing. We're not directing anything. We're not dictating, the lesson plans.
Yeah, and I'm sitting blocks away from the museum. But let me ask you, how many are underprivileged? Where are the underprivileged kids, that is, in the city of Charleston?
I mean, they're scattered around, the neighborhoods. The one that's the most identifiable today, after the, decades of, or at least the last 15, 20 years of gentrification that's been taking place, and, the change of the racial population balance. So I think anyone who reads about anything would say, well, the East Side is still the place where people still have income challenges, and where there's the most identifiable African American population based on the 2020 census. But they're everywhere. So there are schools, Title I schools all over. That were sometimes the city's the host for that school in terms of the facility itself is in the city limits. A lot of them are not. A lot of the schools that are, the most challenged now are in North Charleston or further south, in the south part of the county. And
yes, ma'am. And
yeah.
sorry about the delay, but I wanted to go back to the racial equity training for all city employees. Has the city been able to determine gaps in racial equity across the city government?
No, I think that's part of the, work where, and again, this is another one of the things that has been, weaponized in terms of making it a divisive set of goals. Basically, it's like back in the let's say the 70s, as integration had become more holistic throughout the nation. It took a long time to integrate schools, for example, or to determine that there was a underserved population in higher education or things like that. So basically, my dad was an educator back in that era of the 50s through the 90s, and basically, so the staff and the faculties and the staff who would be serving a variety of students at whatever level were given the opportunity to take their own temperature, evaluate their own life experience on the basis of had they been exposed to another set of people that didn't look like them. And did they have the kind of background that would help them serve all the kids that they were now going to be teaching? So it's that kind of sort of just self-awareness. A lot of employers use that now as a way for new hires to sort of give themselves a set of goals to work on, or understanding that, maybe I did grow up. I was just on a podcast this morning by a gentleman who, he just told his little life story, and he's not that old, so he's in his 40s, I'm sure. And he said, he grew up in the traditional evangelical Christian white community where he thought his family were, totally aware of the full breadth of human society and, where they fit in. But he said after he left home, and especially as he went to law school, he realized that, a lot of his experience was very deficient in helping him put himself in a more holistic, society. So I think it's that kind of thing that that would be part of a new employee's orientation. People have said, well, we're gonna like evaluate people and not hire them if we can prove that they have any racial biases. I mean, we all have racial biases, based on who we are, where we came from, what we know. So that's ridiculous to say that we're going to start having some sort of, autocratic way of weeding people out. It's more about helping people be comfortable as they come into a job that requires their skill and values them for what they're trained to do, and then help them become the best, employee for the city that they have the opportunity to be. So I'm really sort of over people trying to make things more divided than not. It's not helpful, Quintin. It's not helpful. It keeps us all upset and mad, and I certainly don't want my grandson to grow up in a culture like this that would be having to choose. I think that we all need to be more relaxed and more accepting and more open-minded about what we don't know. It's not a sin not to know, what it's like to be a member of society in a more biracial, more aware era. That's a good thing. We're not evaluating ourselves beyond. We should all have a growth chart, right? We should all have ways that we want to develop and become better people for each other and ourselves.
And how is the city assessing current program policies regarding discriminatory actions and job performance with the support of an independent consultant to identify a proactive action plan to actually address that is racial inequity?
I'm sorry, say the first part of your question again.
Yes, ma'am. How is the city assessing current program policies regarding disciplinary action and job performance with the support of an independent consultant to identify a proactive action plan that is to address racial inequity?
We're not. I mean, that was, that is what the Committee on Internal Review, Subcommittee on Internal Review, determined the city is not doing that kind of, evaluation. And so I don't know where that will end up as a priority. I mean, all of these things cost money, right? We've been trying to have a more holistic performance evaluation system that would allow people not only to get like their cost of living increase or their longevity increase, but also have a set of performance, measurements that every employee would be able to work on with their supervisor and their agency head, and then be evaluated for their performance, and maybe hope that they would earn, a little bonus based on their actual individual job performance. But that setting up a system like that takes time and money, and we don't have the staff or the money to do that. So that's been an aspiration of our human resources, leadership ever since I've been on council.
Right.
And smart employers do that because you want to motivate your employees. That it's more than just putting your time in and coming to work. You need to be working for something that then gives you tangible rewards, and so the best employers do that, but we can't afford to get started on that kind of thing. And it will be the same with the kind of consulting work that you're talking about.
Should the city's HR policies be amended to include a restorative justice framework?
Yeah, I think they should be evaluated in terms of, are they deficient in that kind of thing? I've never perceived, and I don't think that the internal review subcommittee that, worked on this would say that there's any egregious, hiring policies or procedures that, really are, let's just say bigoted, so that it would preclude somebody of, a different race or people of color being hired by the city. But I think, always having that as a evaluator for can we be better as an employer, I don't know. But again, that would be something that, will need guidance and time and effort. And yeah, I think it should be a standard that we hold ourselves to. We don't want to be, we don't want to be going against the equal rights that every employee should have in being a candidate, for hire as a recruit. But I don't perceive that we are. I don't think we have that, reputation or that actual way of being an employer.
And I don't know if this is even possible, but has the city been able to review any human resource policies to determine where there may be bias and revise that accordingly?
Not yet. No, that's part of the recommendations.
Okay. And how should the department heads within the city receive training in the restorative justice process?
How should they? I mean, I think there's a lot of methodologies about that, Quintin. So again, all of the things you're reading, from the report are aspirational. And the question you just asked me, again, I don't think that the internal review committee found that there were glaring, inequities or deficiencies or gaps in the way that we treat people at as employers. So I think to say that we've got to sort of twist ourselves into a pretzel to do something better. I'm not sure that that's really the point of the internal review. It did look at things that we can't afford to pay for example. So so that we have a lot of wish list items, I think, that would be very beneficial to people to help their their overall ability to be developing themselves and their own awareness and their own kindness, gentleness spirit as they work together. I mean, we have team development because people do better taking on a job when they can work in a team, and that's a typical way of evaluating an organizational structure. Do the the groups that should be working together choose not to? Do they stay in their silos, and then basically they're not as effective or as efficient because they've got sort of tunnel vision. They don't work across team lines. They don't work across department lines. That's a huge way of improving an organizational set of goals. And I know that Mayor Tecklenburg has worked on that pretty steadily during his time in office as the chief CEO of the city.
Right.
So he hired consultants to evaluate where we needed those kinds of cross-cutting efficiencies, and and developed the goals that let's say the technical review committee is a really good example of that. When we help property owners develop their property, use their property for a new purpose, there's a whole set of standards and regulations that need to be met. And it used to be that, in the old days, you would, as a developer or a property owner wanting to get a set of permits to do something new on your property, you'd literally have to go from office to office to office to office. And it would be, very dividing or just inefficient. And so now we have this technical review committee process where everybody that represents one of those sets of permits comes to the same table at the same meeting every other week and evaluates, the deals that are on their agenda. So they all hear each other, which is great, because sometimes, people that do similar things but not identical things, they're more innovative when they hear each other talking. They work together as colleagues. I mean, it's just all reasons to do that kind of team building. And I think that's the exact same thing we're talking about here, with trying to make sure that we're not leaving people out in opportunities for promotion and advancement and training, and having that kind of cross-cutting look at ourselves and at our departments.
Yes, ma'am. And I have so many follow-up questions to ask you, including I want to talk to you about the seawall, but unfortunately, I have to run off to my regular job. But let me ask you, Carol Jackson, Councilwoman for District 12 for the past 4 years. What is that one project that defines your legacy as Councilwoman?
I mean, if I had to pick one, I guess I would say the James Island Water Quality Task Force, just because it is such a hallmark of what I tried to do going into this office. That I knew that James Island had been very dysfunctional as a set of regulators over the years, and I really wanted to change that paradigm of being as collaborative as I could in my office, and then bring in the opportunities that I think cross-jurisdictional collaboration bring to the citizens. So if I just had to say one thing, I think the James Island Creek Water Quality Task Force is basically a shining example of what you can do better together across all your jurisdictions and across the citizens groups that really care, about what happens in their community. So we have a combination of municipality, county, the 2 water utilities, and the most obvious nonprofits and academic institutions and government institutions. So we have DNR, we have Clemson Extension, their living shorelines, Charleston Coastal Conservation League, Charleston Waterkeeper, and it's really just a well-oiled machine. Everybody's pulling their oar in the same direction, and we're making progress. And it's a long set of goals that we're out to achieve. But I think people are really enjoying. Again, it's like getting people in the same, setting. We've only been able to meet on Zoom for that committee, the length of that committee. But everybody, we have a huge attendance every couple months when we meet. And it's because people see the progress and they feel energized by contributing to something that's going to be, successful. So,
yes, ma'am. One last question, Carol. What happened? Why did you lose?
I mean, I think I lost because James Island as a community has always been, I think, pretty divided. Well, not always. Let me just say, I ran 4 years ago to serve what I saw as the newer residents of the city that were moving to James Island as, families, startup families, retirees who were coming from other places. So I knew that there were a lot of voters and citizens of the city on James Island that felt underrepresented and not heard in terms of their own interests and what they, were hoping government would do and not do. So I felt like there was a huge audience that, was really not known to the city leadership at that point in time. So I ran to represent newer people. And I think I was defeated by people who probably, lived here longer or grew up here and don't really want what they had heard about me as being, more progressive. I was called, really untrue, definitive terms, not in writing, but by the people that were knocking on doors for my opponent. And, so it was very hard to fight those things that if you open your mouth to try to defend yourself, then you just make it all worse. So I do feel like, there were people that just didn't want government to be as insertive in their own lives, and that they had the impression that I was promoting government to be more, more regulatory, more whatever. So I heard the term government overreach a lot, and that was the epitome of that, I think. And I do think that it turned out people that were encouraged to vote against me when I helped the African American neighborhood that lives on the west side off of Battery Island Drive. I helped them, basically uncover the regulations that the barrel owner operation was supposed to be following and had not been. And so, I played my part in sort of shining the light on the regulations that the owner of the barrel had been basically, ignoring, denying, whatever. He knew that he had a great business that needed to be in the space that he didn't have a permit to occupy, and with buildings that he didn't have a permit to build, and on a shoreline that he didn't have a permit to change in terms of, making it. So he had, I think, knowingly, just avoided having to get any other permits that would probably have stymied the operation that he had going on for several years. That was just very successful. He had a great clientele, and they loved going to the barrel and bringing their dogs there. But they abused that privilege by, parking on streets where there were no parking, and taking their dogs, to do their business out into the neighborhoods. And then toward the end of when they were getting pushed back from that neighborhood, leaving their dogs' remains in private property. And it was an ugly scene for, I'd say, the last 6 months that the Barrel operated. And I did that because I came to respect the African American, neighborhood that organized to speak up for itself. And so that probably is the other thing that I'm the most proud of, Quintin, in terms of my overall time in office, but also the way I've lived my life. I like to help people, find out their own voice and make things happen for the right reasons. And I do feel like, all they did was just say, city, you need to pay attention to the permits that this operation has. And as soon as the city did that, the fire marshal and the code enforcement office and the planning department realized that the permits were totally inadequate for the kind of restaurant operation the gentleman was running. So anyway, but I know that a lot of people that were Barrel customers came out and voted against me, and that's their right. I wouldn't change what I did there. I'm very happy with the way that I helped the neighborhood figure things out, and and the city, we didn't avoid the regulations. It's at the lowest border of James Island when our code enforcement officers are totally stretched thin. We don't have enough parking. We can't enforce, no parking. So it's a very hard to enforce location. And I think that, that's really what happened, that it had gone on way too long without any enforcement. And we just helped shine the light on that.
How will you keep your voice relevant after leaving City Council on January 11th?
Well, you started out talking to me about, what I'm understanding in the infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. So I'm going to keep working on that. I have my background is in community development and housing, so I'm going to be on two board of directors that make housing and community development support for local business happen. The Climb Fund is the community development lender. We're mostly small business, and then I'm on the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation board that works with the city and the Charleston Housing Authority to create housing. So I'll be on those two boards of directors, and I'm going to be on a subcommittee for the Low Country Local First, which is the support organization for only local business. And I'll be working on their policy and advocacy goals. So, I don't lack for interests and things to do. And I promised my husband that I was not going to be home all day, every day. So I'll be out and about. But I'm really, I'm just very grateful for all the people that I've met along the way, and people that I know started out as my constituents or my next door neighbor constituents, and people that I can call friends and collaborators. And it's a great, lovely, small community. I do wish that we were stopped fighting, but I think that day will come.
Councilwoman Carol Jackson, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. I appreciate the opportunity to shine a light on the things I care about.
You're welcome.